Joining us, this is the France 24 debate. We're looking at that truce in Gaza. We're asking whether Hamas is changing. We're going to look more broadly in our second part here of this debate at the implications from shifting alliances in the broader region. With us to talk about it from Gaza City, Gallagher Fenwick is with us, France 24's correspondent in the area. Walid Assaf, who is a member of the Palestinian Parliament from the Fatah movement. Thank you for being back with us. Gil Mihaly of Yediot Aharonot, the Israeli daily newspaper from Washington. Youssef Munayer of the Jerusalem Fund and Palestinian Center think tank. Just before the break, we were talking about the Iron Dome, and just this system to protect from short-range missiles. Does it allow Israel to sort of live in splendid isolation a bit more?
No, it gives its leadership some more maneuvering space because there are a lot less dead and wounded and damages. But the problem is that it's economic paralysis. Even behind a very effective missile protection system, you don't send the kids to school, you don't go shopping, and you don't go to work. Everyone is inside, and even if it's a 99%, no one takes a chance. So you have less dead, so the government is not pushed by a public opinion, by funerals, by news magazines with blood to do something. So it gives the government maneuvering space. It protects valuable assets like petroleum terminals, like military bases. This is the main role of the system.
All right, Youssef Munayer, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there's three important points that we need to make here. First, when it comes to a ceasefire in this situation, we have to remember that the end of projectiles going back and forth in no way means that the 1.7 million civilians in Gaza are no longer facing systematic human rights abuses from the Israelis, although we're not seeing that on the other side. The siege of Gaza continues, and even when the hostilities stop during these periods of escalation, the civilian population continues to deal with the harsh reality of siege.
But there's no siege. The Egyptian frontier is open.
The idea that there is no siege is actually quite laughable when you look at the realities on the ground.
Why doesn't material and everything comes from Egypt? The Egyptian border is open for about a year.
Sir, you know very well that the terminals at the Egyptian crossing are for the transportation of people and not for goods.
They had a year to build everything they want. It doesn't take a year to build.
The influx of goods are determined by the Israelis, which have since the 2005 agreement on movements and access have not honored it for 1 day in terms of the number of trucks which are supposed to be entering Gaza and the connection between Gaza and the West Bank. But returning to my point before I was interrupted, the other important point we have to remember, and this is a point that I would make to our Israeli interlocutor here, is that while the Israeli government demands that Hamas play the role of a state in being responsible for security as a neighbor to the Israelis, it certainly does not afford Hamas the kind of respect as a government, as a state, as it would anyone else. It's continuing to violate the territorial integrity of Gaza. It continues to fire into Gaza routinely. It prevents access to Gaza's seawater and its ports. And cuts it off from the rest of the world on its borders and so on. So if the Israeli government wants the government of Hamas to act like a state only in the sense that it protect Israel's security, it must also reciprocate in the same fashion by affording the government of Hamas in Gaza the same sort of respect it would for any other state. It has to work both ways. Lastly, just on the Iron Dome, if I could make this point, I would disagree with any sense of optimism about the Iron Dome, because we have to remember the context of this particular situation. We saw perhaps one of the largest escalations that we have in recent years largely by one faction, really the third largest faction in Gaza. And so the idea that the Iron Dome is somehow changing the balance, I'm not quite sure that's true when you think about the potential capacity that groups like Hamas, if they were to be involved in full force, I don't think they want to be, but if they were, the dynamics on the battlefield certainly do not change, and they certainly do not change when we're talking about groups like Hezbollah and larger governments.
Right,
for example, the best way for the Israelis to have 100% security is to find a just solution to the issue, and that necessitates providing dignity and human rights to the Palestinians in Gaza and throughout the occupied territories.
All right, let's speak to Gallagher Fenwick, our correspondent. Gallagher, you've been to up and down the Gaza Strip countless times. What has opening that border crossing at Rafah changed?
Not much, actually, simply because it remains very difficult for Gazans to travel through Rafah because the Egyptians are not very helpful. The Egyptian authorities do not want the Gazan problem to be solved on their shoulders. That's what a lot of Palestinian analysts explain to me. And also, Gazans themselves do not want to become dependent on Egyptian. They want very much to remain connected to what they consider their natural land or country, rather, which is the West Bank, Jerusalem. So Gazans have their eyes turned towards the West Bank, Jerusalem, and what they call the territories of 48, which is Israel. And so that opening of the Rafah crossing certainly doesn't solve all of Gaza's problems. It has enabled more people to travel, but again, that remains a complicated procedure. It's administratively complicated, and the Egyptian authorities apparently have this long list of people who have been blacklisted, Palestinians who have been blacklisted by Egyptian authorities, considered a security threat, or for some other reason are not allowed into Egyptian territory.
All right, the truce, by the way, brokered by Egypt, which gets high praise these days in the eyes of Gaza's rulers, Hamas.
We don't trust the Zionist enemy at all, because he only thinks of killing more Palestinians. But we trust the Palestinian resistance and its leaders. And of course, we trust the Egyptians. They can force the Zionist enemy to be committed to the truce.
Walid Asaf, since the fall of Hosni Mubarak, what's changed in the relationship between Egypt and the Palestinians?
Mainly the official situation is the same. There is no change. The Egyptian policy itself is there. And the relation between the Egyptian government and the Palestinian Authority is the same. There is no change. But on the ground in Gaza, there is little changes. According to Rafah, entrance Rafah, only the passengers, they can move now. The free movement of passengers. But for goods, it should be enter from Karim Abu Salim or from Al-Muntar. And still the Israelis are controlling that places. So actually, nothing changed in Gaza until now. The Israeli siege on Gaza is there. And all the cement, the iron, all these, the concrete, which is needed for rebuilding Gaza is still not allowed to enter Gaza. Because also the Rafah agreement for the entrance between Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, Israel, and the European Union is not allowing the goods to pass through Rafah entrance. So it should pass through Israel, through Karim Abu Salim and Al-Muntar. And Israel is controlling there, so the situation is there. And the damaged houses still unbuilt.
Let me ask you the question. On Monday, Egypt's parliament unanimously voted a resolution calling for the expulsion of Israel's ambassador in Cairo and halting gas exports to the Jewish state. Now, it's symbolic because those decisions are in the hands of the government, which is under the control of the military. Do you feel when you're speaking with Egypt, is there that you have several people with whom to speak to? Who's in charge, when you're speaking with them?
Still, those who are controlling the Egypt are the same. They are the government with Prime Minister Al-Janzouri and the council, the military council. They are controlling and with the same policy. Nothing changed. And those in the parliament, the voices in the parliament, still it is in the parliament. It couldn't change the situation there. And I think even Al-Ikhwan Muslimin, the Islamic Brotherhood, they agreed for the peace treaty with Israel. And they will not change the situation there. I don't think that this new spring in Egypt and the changes in the parliament will change the situation dramatically. Maybe if Israel will attack Gaza and will occupy it, maybe the things will be changed slowly. But until now, I think Egypt still it have its rule to keep the situation quiet and not to allow the situation to be changed.
All right, and Gallagher Fenwick, the Egyptians who brokered the truce for the, it's the same modus operandi as in the past?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question, François. Could you repeat it, please?
I'm saying for the Egyptians who brokered that truce that we've just seen in the Gaza Strip, is it the same modus operandi? Is it the same people, the same way of doing things?
Well, very much so. You know, as you've been saying, Egypt have really become the most influential and key players in these crises between Hamas, or rather Gaza, and Israel. They've become, if you want, the necessary, the obligatory channel through which discussions can be held, because Hamas and Israel don't talk directly. They have to go through Egyptian mediators. Now, what usually happens is that, for instance, the Hamas delegation goes to Cairo. This was the case during these past 4 days. A Hamas delegation was actually already in Cairo before the fighting broke out, but extra senior members of the Islamist group went there, talked to Egyptian officials, who then talked to the Israelis, and that's pretty much how people come to a comprehensive agreement. So yes, very much a similar modus operandi, even though it has to be said that Hamas authorities are now looking to Egyptian authorities with a much more positive eye than they did under Mubarak. I remember a lot of Gazans before Mubarak's fall telling me that they absolutely did not trust Egyptian authorities. I wouldn't say that they like Egyptian authorities today, but there's certainly a lot more trust than there was under Mubarak.
All right. Another big change with obviously in the past year, in the past month rather, Hamas officials officially announcing that they were severing ties with the regime of Bashar al-Assad, which for years had hosted the headquarters of the movement in Damascus. Let me ask you the question, Youssef Munayyer, the fact that the leader of Hamas is no longer in Damascus, how much does that change the movement?
I think there's a lot of other factors that change the movement as well, and perhaps the most important one is that once the movement started to become a government and not simply a resistance movement, the responsibilities that it had towards the population changed. I think really that is the single largest factor that explains any change of behavior in the Islamic resistance movement or Hamas in the past several years. And I think that, you know, when you look at the behavior of Hamas over the last several years, even prior to you know, the Arab Spring and any of the changes in their relationship with Damascus, we began to see some of these changes as well.
All right, but in the past month, how have things changed with the leaving Damascus? Has that changed?
I think it's a little bit early to tell, because these developments have been really so recent. Certainly, there's a reason to think that there could be a lot of change in the relationship between Hamas and Syria and Iran and what have you. But we've seen conflicting statements from you know, people within Hamas about whether or not they'd be involved in any sort of Israel-Iran war and what have you. So I think that there is a disconnect within the movement about that issue and their larger foreign policy. I think we started to see some of those fissures become a little bit more evident when Khalid Mish'al was in Qatar, for example, with Mahmoud Abbas and so on. But again, I think it's a little bit too early to tell what kind of effect that's going to have on the movement, and if it's going to have any more of a significant effect than the conditions that have already set the movement towards governance and away from simply being a resistance movement.
All right, we can call up a map of the wider region, and it's interesting because the shift away from Damascus on the part of the leadership there in exile, and you were saying to us, Walid Asaf, before we went on air, that when you're dealing with Hamas, you've got to always remember that there are those who are in exile and there are those who are inside the Gaza Strip.
Yes, actually, the move from Damascus changed. It was one of the main reasons for the reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas. And the last situation between Hamas and Damascus also, it was also one of the main reasons for a Doha announcement. So I think the movement of Hamas leaders out of Damascus was one of the main reasons for the reconciliation. And now Hamas is looking for another place to stay. Now Hamas, its leaders are spreading all over many countries in the region. And they can't support the resistance as they were in Damascus. They lost that place, which give them the authority or the power to support the resistance. Now Hamas, I think it will, those who are outside, they are in need for the reconciliation more than those who are inside.
More than those who are inside.
Yeah. And the second thing, that Hamas is moving away from the resistance to be a government and a regime that and this truce and this ceasefire shows that Hamas, they don't want to involve in the war. They want to keep the situation quiet in Gaza Strip because it affects their interests there. So these two changes affected by the relation, the new relation between Hamas and Syria.
And we're going to leave it there. We won't have time to broach you on questions of whether that Hamas-Fatah reconciliation can be finalized. But I want to thank you, Walid Asaf, for joining us. I want to thank Gil Mihaly for being with us. Gallagher Fenwick for joining us from Gaza City. And Youssef Mounayir from Washington. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's time for Business, hosted by Marcus Carlson.